right, how's that look?
Great, thank you.
Good to go?
Yeah. All right, everyone. So thank you for attending ICHP's virtual mock interview series. This is the do's and don'ts with current residents. So just discussing how to interview, other interview processes for residency, and just overall advice. Some quick announcements we have, just to stay tuned, because this is a series. We're going to be having mock interviews coming up in January, February. So more information will come within the next couple of weeks from ICHP. If you're not on our email list, please reach out to Kevin or I, and we'll get you set up to be receiving those emails, okay?
All right, and so our first speaker tonight is Dr. Denise Lamb. Dr. Lamb completed her PharmD at the UIC College of Pharmacy last year and is a former vice president of ICHP during her P3 year. She was also involved in ROCI and APHA during her time in school, in addition to working as a pharmacy technician at Advocate Christ Medical Center. And Denise is a current PGY1 pharmacy resident at Loyola University Medical Center. Denise, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us. Is there anything that you wanted to say to start us off?
That was the first time someone called me, introduced me as Dr. Lamb, so that was a little weird. So that was a little weird. But no, I don't have anything else to say. Thanks for the very nice introduction.
Of course. And then our next speaker is Dr. Henry Okorike. Dr. Okorike also graduated with his PharmD from UIC last year and was a past president of ICHP during his P3 year. Additionally, he was active member of many other student organizations such as ROCI and PLS, as well as working as a pharmacy technician at Northwestern Memorial Hospital. And Henry is a current PGY1 acute care pharmacy resident at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. Henry, thank you as well for being here. Is there anything that you wanted to say at this time?
No, I'm looking forward to sharing some tips with you all and hope that we can help you get through this difficult time with applying for residencies.
Perfect. And then our final speaker is Dr. Jake Switek. Dr. Switek completed his PharmD as well at UIC last year and was active in the Pharmacy Student Council as well as other student organizations while being an active member in the community. He also worked as an extern at UI Health and is the current community-based resident at UIC. Jake as well, thank you again for being here. Is there anything that you wanted to say as of now?
Not much now, but nice to see everyone.
For sure, for sure. And then Tara, do you want to do questions to start?
Sorry, yes, of course. Our first question today is going to be, so how would you describe the residency interview process for those who may not be familiar with it? We do have some P1s and P2s in the chat, so if you could just give a brief overview of what the next couple of months will look like for a P4 student. And PGY1s, because I know you apply to PGY2s as well.
How would you like us to answer? Do you have like a preferred order or just anybody?
No, we can go in the order of how we introduce the speaker. So we can do Denise, Marie, then Jake, if that works with all of you.
Sure. Okay. I guess like how I would describe the interview process, I guess it's, I think it's a little bit stressful depending on like when your rotations are. Scheduling everything gets a little hectic, depending on how many interviews you have. So I guess in regards to the process there, like you, I think you just have to like make sure you're planning time out for not only your interviews but also preparing for your interviews, because you do have to prepare a little bit. You have to get to know the program, so you don't ask questions because they want you to ask questions, and I don't think they want you to ask questions that you can find on their website. So do your research for sure, but you also have to like balance that with like rotations and stuff too. If you are on rotation, if you're off, that's even better if it's like your off mod. But the process varies from, I think, interview, like institution to institution, like what the interview is like. Overall, it's kind of like you do a tour, and they like introduce, like they give you kind of like a rundown of the residency program, and then they kind of break you off into like groups, and then you kind of like interview with different groups of people of like within the pharmacy department. And that's kind of the same, like, from every institution. Some institutions incorporate like journal clubs, some institutions incorporate like cases and like work like to do on the spot basically that you have to work through. So like I said, I think it overall kind of differs between where you're interviewing, but yeah, I don't really know what else to say about that.
We can go to Henry next just to fill in anything else too that you might have to comment on.
Yeah, so I would start by summarizing the interview process in general by saying depending on the place you're interviewing, it's a long interview process. It's not the standard meeting with one person talking for 30 minutes and getting out of there. It is a full look at the program. Depending on the institutions you're applying to, there will definitely be multiple people you'll talk to throughout the day. You'll see the leadership or the C-suite talking to the director of pharmacy or some management. You'll talk to pharmacist, the RPD, obviously. You'll talk to various people within the pharmacy organization, and you'll be able to discuss the program, obviously, as well as discuss yourself and what makes you a strong fit for that program. There's a lot of stylistically, there's a lot of behavioral style questions that I think is another thing that's different from what you may expect going into an interview. It's a lot less clinical questions and a lot more putting themselves in your shoes about a time that you did something on rotation or a time you did something in research or a time you mentored somebody. And it's trying to get a good look at you as a person and not just you as, like, are you able to spit out what drugs cover MRSA? So I think that's another thing that people may not be aware of is how much stock they put into those behavioral style questions. I think that's a big takeaway from the residency interview process. But essentially you'll have multiple panels with people you interview with. You'll have some type of either presentation or some type of way for them to assess your clinical knowledge base, but that's not the crux of the interview. The majority is on those personality style questions and the behavioral questions.
Great, Jake, if you want to give your 2 cents.
Awesome. So I won't repeat a lot of the stuff they said, but I mean, Henry and Denise had some great points with like the residency interview process. It's definitely not just like a quick 30-minute interview like Henry said. It's definitely an extensive process and it can vary from institution to institution. So for myself, I applied to a lot of the community-based programs and specialty pharmacy programs, and a lot of the times they'll either tell you in advance to prep for like a patient case presentation or present like some sort of in-service on a medication. Just kind of going off what Henry was saying, they're not really kind of assessing your clinical knowledge. They're just trying to see like how you present or how you pretty much act on the spot, especially like in response to their questions. So a good example is for one of my programs, they didn't tell me what the case was ahead of time. So right when I showed up, they told me to counsel a patient on Trulicity. So they kind of gave me like 15 minutes to look over the package insert and then 15 minutes to kind of counsel a patient in front of like the panelists. As for other things for like the residency interview process, one thing I've kind of just been suggesting to current P1s, P2s, and even P3s is when you're preferencing, Mod 5 and Mod 6 is when the bulk of the work happens. So Mod 5 is when you're most often filling out your forecast, doing your letters of intent, getting your letters of recommendation, kind of creating the package for your residency application. Whereas Mod 6 is where majority of your interviews happen. So just kind of plan that ahead to see either, take one of those mods off or try to get some easier rotations during that time off, or during like Mod 5 or 6.
Great, thank you guys. So we'll move on to our second question then. Our second question is, what would you say are the best ways for students to stand out in a virtual interview? And I'm sorry, I tripped up my words. I'll repeat that. What would you say are the best ways for students to stand out in a virtual interview?
That's something I'm still trying to figure out too, because we haven't, this is going to be the first year we're experiencing virtual interviews as well. So we're kind of going to be struggling along with you guys. I think kind of the way I'm going about it is the same way I would in like an in-person interview. I guess like they want to see your personality. They want to see you be like be yourself, because sorry, my co-residents are next to me. I lost my train of thought. You guys suck. They, like I said, they want to see you like be yourself, and like so I guess the best way to do that is just like they want to see you ask questions. They want you to be personable. I think that still stands for a virtual interview. It's a little bit harder because you know, obviously you lose that like actual personal interaction, and it's all talking through a screen. But I think like the principle is the same. Is like they want to see who you are, and that's what really kind of gets, like what Henry said, is that that's really what they care about. That's really what they want to see. So trying to make that shine through as much as possible. And if going through these like Zoom meetings like we're doing now, like I don't know, I'm hoping my personality is being portrayed through the phone, but kind of doing that. Yeah, like I said, it's a, like I said, we're struggling. It's us. I mean, we're trying to go through the same process. So we're definitely feeling the struggle with you, along with you guys too. But like I said, just I think trying as much as possible to let your personality shine through a screen, as difficult as that may be.
Great, thank you, Denise. Henry?
Yeah, so that is a good point that Denise brought up, that this is also new for us, but I think a lot of the same tips that we would tell you to stand out in a normal interview would apply here. I also had the experience of interviewing for a position yesterday, and that was majority in person, but there were still virtual components that I was able to try to employ some of the same advice that I had received from applying to positions last year. And I think the biggest things you can do in a virtual setting is try to find ways to communicate that interest through, traditionally it would be like nonverbal communication, but here you'd have to just explicitly show that through your questions that you ask and through the way that you answer your questions. My RPD last year, my RPD this year, he told me that one of the things he liked about me was during my interviews, he could see the way I would perk up about something that I was super excited about talking about, and just making sure that you can continue to communicate that even virtually with your voice inflections and your eyes, especially if you're wearing a mask, depending on where you're sitting, and making sure that they're aware of if they ask you about a project and you're super passionate about that, perk up, like make it obvious that this is something you care about, or if it's a specialty you're really interested in, show that you're interested, because it's harder for them to tell with your posture coming up or your hands getting wild. You can't really see what my hands are doing right now because we're in a virtual setting. But with the questions, and like that's one thing that I feel helped me stand out last year and applying to early commitment yesterday, was the fact that my questions were unique and got them to open up more than they're used to. And I think a lot of that goes back to asking them about their work, things that they're excited about, and trying to get to the crux of why they're at that institution and what keeps them there, because that is what they're passionate about, if they want to be there at least. And if they don't want to be there, it'll be clear because they won't have an answer right away. And I think not just answering the standard questions that you've seen on like every website, and definitely not asking questions that you can find on the website, because that gets annoying. As a resident that's receiving a lot of emails from prospective students asking questions that I can quickly just refer you to the website on, I'm not a fan of that. So definitely avoid that. But generally, show your personality, show what you're passionate about, and obviously do your Zoom hygiene stuff. So be normal background, don't wear like super stripes on your shirt so that like looks super wavy on your camera. Though I got a lot of compliments on my outfit, even virtually. So I think that's something to keep in mind too, is that they can see what you're wearing. So you can try to stand out in that way too, especially if you like the way you dress. So I think that's another small tip for standing out in a virtual interview. But the content is what matters, content and passion.
Thanks, Henry. Jake, we would like to hear your thoughts too.
Sure. They've actually mentioned a majority of the stuff, but I mean, I could kind of talk more about like your environment and setting. I mean, definitely, this is definitely a hard question to answer since we're all kind of in the process of learning. But I feel like, especially all of us here, we've gotten a head start since, you know, especially P1s, P2s, and P3s, you guys are using Zoom, WebEx, Blackboard, Collaborate for all these different recitations and classes. So you guys are at least getting used to the platforms. So I guess my number one tip is just come prepared to the interview. I mean, the last thing interviews are going to want to hear is, oh, sorry, I forgot how to use Zoom. Sorry, I forgot how to use WebEx, or, you know, I'm having technical difficulties. So come prepared ahead of time. And just like Henry was saying, dress for the part, you know, dress for success. Like, even though you're on a webcam, they may only see your top, you know, like the top. I would say, you know, wear both top and bottom. Don't wear like a suit and then pajama pants, because you never know. Your interviewer might make you stand up. And I mean, it's just always a matter of fact, like, you know, look good, feel good. And then another thing that kind of helps me for like, since we do a lot of like WebEx and Zoom meetings, is just kind of clearing up my space within like my office. Like, you know, put my phone away, put any notepads away, because you'll just get distracted throughout the interview and that'll show too. So you want to at least maintain some sort of eye contact and not get distracted by your environment. Because I feel like in this virtual setting, it's really easy to get distracted from the screen.
Great, thank you guys. So we'll go to question 3 and we'll change up the order just so Jake, you don't always have to talk last. We'll have you talk first and then Henry and then Denise. So question 3 is going to be, how would you prepare differently for a virtual interview versus an in-person interview, if at all, for any particular part of it?
You know what? I don't think I would really prepare any differently, since I would say, I mean, kind of how like Denise and Henry were talking about, they're still going to ask the same type of questions. You're still going to want to ask them good questions, show you're passionate about, you know, their residency program and what they have to offer. I guess the only major thing I would do differently is I would maybe, since we are in like a virtual setting, I would maybe have some notes written down on the side to kind of refer back to. But most often when you go into interviews, you're going to have your CV with you regardless. So I guess just to offer one like word of advice is know your entire CV. So pretty much whatever you have on your CV, make sure you know to talk about every single point on your CV. Even if you list like some sort of journal club from like a couple years ago, make sure to know how to talk about that, because those interviewers, they can pick anything off of your CV and ask you to like kind of collaborate on it.
Exactly. I think that came up yesterday. I interviewed for like 6 hours yesterday, but part of my interview was asking about my CV. So it still comes up even as a PGY1. I got questions on stuff I'm doing now and stuff I did at UIC. So I think it's relevant to keep in mind. I think preparing differently outside of content, I think practicing in front of your computer like you would if your meeting would be, or if your interview would be on the computer. So focusing on like staring at your computer's camera, I think is the biggest takeaway, because you get so used to staring at the people talking that it can look like you're not looking at them just because of how your computer is set up. So I think that's something that I got a lot of good feedback on from my giving my CE presentation, was that it looked like I was looking at them the whole time because I was just so used to staring at my like camera's dot. And I think that was a good takeaway that I tried to use for the virtual aspect of my interview yesterday. In terms of content, I wouldn't prepare any differently, because they're not gonna, they have, if they're a good enough program, they have an established interview style and interview questions that have been validated. I know at least UNC validates their questions beforehand and they rarely adjust. They just have like a bank they pull from. So I wouldn't adjust in terms of like, maybe you can add a couple of thoughts of like how you overcome adversity with the coronavirus and virtual rotations and things like that. But I wouldn't prepare any differently in terms of content. I would more prepare in terms of talking over a virtual connection with like your charger, making sure you have a backup. I have a portable laptop charger, so I brought that just in case yesterday. Having backups for any presentations you may give, either sending it to yourself virtually or using a flash drive and bringing that in, or having a dongle. Like my laptop just has Thunderbolt ports, but if I had to give my presentation yesterday and they didn't have the connection, I had several connections that I could use to connect that. So I guess preparing for the technology aspects of the interview would be my only way to prepare differently.
Yeah, I don't really know how much to add. I think kind of echoing, like Jake had mentioned it, and Henry had mentioned it earlier about like making sure you're not like make sure you're secluded, like you have your space, you don't have like your cat walking across your keyboard while you're in the middle of an interview or something. Kind of like making sure you're dressed. They can see you still. Make sure you're not sitting there in a wife beater or something. Still dress up. Yeah, I don't really have anything else to add, to be honest.
Okay, great. Thank you guys. So our next question, we'll just change up the order again. So Henry's not always in the middle this time. Henry, if you don't mind going first, and then Jake, and then Denise. The question is would you approach the application process differently with interviews being virtual? An example of this would be, would you consider applying to more programs with less travel involved now that they're virtual, or any other ideas that this question may bring to your mind?
So I think that's a good question because that is the assumption that may come into play, especially with mid-year, not like mid-year if you're a member being free for ASHP members, and at least for PGY1s, PPS is also free this year for ASHP members. So that decreases the barrier of entry for people. And I think that could lead to just intrinsically applying to more programs reflexively almost. But I think a lot of applying to programs has to do with your thought process in terms of what you want in a program. And I hope that people are keeping in mind their priorities when it comes to applying and not just applying for the sake of applying. Because you don't want to apply to a place that you wouldn't have traveled to for an interview and then expect to travel there for your career. I don't, at least in my head, like I was definitely not geographically limited, as you can see from me being in North Carolina. I applied all over the US. I did not have any qualms about price, which I do understand that that's a significant barrier to a lot of people in terms of travel. But I think you should focus, it should be an aspect of your decision making, but you should focus more on what specialties you're interested in, what rotations do you want to see? Do you want to be in an academic medical center versus a community hospital? Do you want an ambulatory care heavy rotation? Do you want to be in a VA? Are there states that you would not mind living in for the remainder of your career? And focusing on aspects like that. How many residents do you want? Focusing on stuff like that, and then using Showcase, talking to residents, and trying to find ways to narrow that down, because there are hundreds of residency programs out there, and you're gonna want to find things that you are looking for in that program. You don't want to just broadly cast your net out, because if you get 20 plus interviews and you apply to 20 plus places, whether or not they're virtual or in person, you're going to be burnt out regardless. So I wouldn't recommend just blindly increasing the number of programs you apply to just because they're virtual.
Am I going next? Okay. So I couldn't agree more with Henry. I mean, I don't think I would do anything differently since, you know, if interviews were being virtual. I mean, I'll just put it out there. When I was applying for residencies, I only applied to 4 programs because I was like 100% set on if I got to apply to any of those programs, I would be very happy. And that's how it's going to be. Like, just because now everything's going to be virtual and you won't have to travel, don't apply to like 50 programs. Apply to programs that you think you're going to be really happy doing, because residency is definitely a hard year. And like I said numerous times, is when you're interviewing, that's going to show during your interview, regardless if it's in person or virtual, like what your motivation is to be at that program, or if you just applied to that program just because it was convenient for you. So I would say one thing you could take advantage of this entire like virtual situation is actually meeting up with like current residents and people that work there. I guess you can kind of take that to your advantage instead of, you know, losing time on travel, because I feel like residents are a little bit more easily accessible now. And a lot of residency programs are actually offering separate, like I would call them like mini ICHP annuals or mini like mid-years going on. And I know UIC literally just had theirs like 2 weeks ago, where we invited a ton of students from UIC, a ton of different programs. So I feel like definitely take advantage of this virtual platform to speak to others like in the residency program.
And just as context, I applied to 12 programs, so I did apply to a lot of programs, but I also had those programs. I wanted to go to all those programs, so.
Yeah, I don't agree that like just because you can apply to more places because you don't have to travel doesn't mean you should. But on the same, like that being said, if there is a program that you were interested in that might have been like you were at the time, like whether or not be financially, because I know I was broke, we'll go right around like interview season. So like not having the money to go like buy a ticket, like a plane ticket or a hotel room or something or whatever for one day for an interview, like that, you know, that could have been like a reason why you wouldn't apply to a program, even if it was something that you would really wanted to go to. So I think taking advantage of the fact that it is virtual in that sense, I think is a perk, I guess, because I know like I'm PGY1, I was kind of, I wanted to stay in Chicago, so I really only applied to Chicago programs. But like PGY2s, like I'm looking all over the place. You know, I'm looking at Utah and Boston and like Atlanta. So and as a resident, like time and money is limited. So like the fact that it is virtual, I don't have to worry about that. I don't have to worry about, you know, making sure I set money aside to make sure I can afford to go to all these interviews, hopefully. So yeah, I think, like I said, don't just blindly apply to programs just because you can, but I think take advantage of the programs that you do enjoy and you do want to go to, taking advantage of the fact that it's virtual, to actually apply there and not have to, you know, stress about how you're going to get there and the financial aspect of it.
Great, thank you guys. So our last question, and then we'll open it up to the floor for any questions students might have, is going to be, what is the best way for P4 students to maximize / highlight their rotation experiences if they were online? And we'll go back to our original order of Denise, Henry, Jake.
I think the best way to like maximize it is, if it's online, is ask. I mean, I guess it kind of depends on what the rotation is. If it is online, I think trying to go above and beyond, and like if there's projects, like additional projects you can work on that you have time for, I think asking for those, I think stuff that you can like put on your CV that you went kind of above and beyond is obviously a perk and something that you could, that might help you stand out like on your CV.
I'm not sure if this happened to anyone else. Denise, I think you froze for a little bit there after you just said
no.
standing out on your CV.
Oh, okay. Hang on, I don't remember what I was saying. I don't remember. Basically, I think, like I said, if you can like pick up extra projects, like I think asking for those from your preceptors, I think would help you stand out in interviews as well. You can speak to that and saying how you kind of like took on the extra responsibilities, which is something that they might look for in a resident as well. So I think also, because we got affected by it a little bit, like my last rotation was online. It wasn't like a clinical rotation that was online, so it was it's a little hard to like figure out how I would have adjusted if it was clinical, but I think I definitely didn't take advantage of the time that I did have. I kind of just worked instead of like, it was like a NAPLEX review, and I really could have taken that time to actually study and prepare for my NAPLEX and probably taken it earlier. So I think just like being smart with your time and making sure you're learning as much as you can. If there's, you know, if you have more time to look stuff up and you have actually time to delve into different topics that you might be interested in, to actually take that time, not to just like, oh, we had online, you know, virtual rounds for an hour and a half and now I have nothing to do for the rest of the day. So optimizing your time that you have, asking for more projects, and then like a little bit of like self-directed learning, like read, learn stuff. I think it's going to help you in a long run.
Those are all definitely good considerations to keep in mind for virtual rotations. I feel that if I had to go through a virtual rotation while still trying to make myself competitive for PGY1 positions, I would try to, and this is something that I would do anyway in normal experience. So try to take advantage of your limited time with that preceptor to put together deliverables, including like case reports, articles, any type of publication you can think of, even if it's a more like just a review article for ICHP's state newsletter, or something for ACCP or APHA, or any type of publication there where you can then speak to, like Denise talked about, maximizing your time. If you have only virtual rounds and nothing else for the rest of the day, maybe you can work on some type of longitudinal project that you can then talk about on residency interviews. And obviously, I think another good takeaway is to still try to go above and beyond for your patients and still be thoughtful and considerate and empathetic towards your patients. And especially if you're in an ambulatory care setting and you're doing mostly telemedicine, that could be a big barrier for elderly patients or patients with a lot of comorbidities. And being able to describe on a residency interview a time where you walked through how to use a medication virtually and any barriers that came into play there. Maybe you walk them through a website and how to get to this drug delivery YouTube video and had them watch it with you and then cleared up any questions they had. Or maybe you're explaining how to navigate this virtual setting when they then see their physician for their annual checkup in a month or so. And describing those type of experiences, trying to make sure that you're not only treating the patient from your limited rotation aspect, but making sure that they're cared for long-term by helping them with technology, helping them with fully understanding their medications, and just trying to go above and beyond for your patients. So I think those are good takeaways for maximizing your online rotation experiences.
All right, couldn't agree more. I'll have a couple other things to add on to this is, I guess, virtual rotations. I mean, I'm sorry you guys have to like go through that, but in reality, I feel like that's where a lot of healthcare, especially in the outpatient setting and AmCare setting, that's where a lot of healthcare is heading towards. So especially with like my previous rotation, I was at family medicine clinic. I would say 90% of our patient visits were managing type 2 diabetes, warfarin monitoring, all over the phone. So I feel like it's just a matter of adapting and being able to talk about that experience. I would say just go above and beyond. I mean, you'll be in your own comfortable environment. I know some people get like nervous around patients, but at least now you're doing things over the phone or you're doing things through like WebEx. So I would say try to take on more patient workload. I know preceptors really like it when, you know, students ask them for like more work to do. Like, oh, hey, I already finished working up these 3 patients. Like, what else could I help out with? It's like, you know, you'll have a lot of downtime. So like Henry and Denise were saying, pick up more in-service topics, or, you know, try to do some sort of publications, and then just find more ways to like contribute for your patients. Like Henry was saying, like, you know, providing them like some sort of online resources, or, you know, it might be difficult counseling them over the phone, but at least you can provide them resources such as like a YouTube video or like a website. And then another thing I'd like to recommend too is this might become useful for a lot of future rotations, is downloading the Doximity app, which you can just download it straight on your phone as an application. You hook up your headphones and you can work up patients on your computer and make patient calls from your cell phone. And you can actually make calls through your clinic phone number using your cell phone. So it's kind of cool because you're not calling from your own personal phone number. I'll go ahead and post the app name in the chat if any of you guys want to check it out.
Great, thank you, Jake. I was just about to ask you if you could do that. And that ends our already assigned pre-made questions from ICHP. We're gonna open it up to the floor. If anyone would like to put their question in the chat, or you can unmute your mic and screen if you would like and ask away.
Hello. Can you guys hear me?
Yep, we hear you.
This is Mike. I'm a P4 at UIC, and I was wondering if any of you had problems with scheduling interviews during month 6, and I don't know, any advice that you could give on trying to address those problems?
I can talk about that. I had my interview. I had my AmCare rotation during Mod 6, and I kind of was hoping my off mod was like Mod 7, and I was like, oh, that's fine. Half my interviews will be during Mod 6, half will be in Mod 7. That wasn't the case. They were literally all Mod 6. I think the best advice I can have is being open with your preceptors. And I didn't have an interest in AmCare, but I kind of like basically like talk to my preceptors beforehand, like, hey, I'm applying to all these residency programs. I like, you don't know right away. I think like for day one, like when you have to, or even when you have to email them, just being like, hey, I'm applying for residencies. You know, you can even tell them how many programs you apply to, just so they have an idea of how many interviews you could have. And then just like every day being open with them as you get emails for interview requests, you know, let them know, you know, the next day, like, hey, I got an email from this program. I might have the interview this day, because usually they'll either, some programs will tell you when you're interviewing, other ones will tell you, will like ask you to schedule something. So I think like just being open with your preceptor and being like, hey, this is what's going on. These are the interviews I have. Especially at UIC like pretty heavily like pushes residency. So most of the preceptors are very, very understanding when you have to miss rotation for interviews. You just have to be completely open with them and keep them in the loop, so they know what's happening, so they can like adjust appropriately and make sure that they have, you know, that you still get the best out of the rotation, you know, even taking these days off. So definitely keep them in the loop for sure.
Yeah, to add to that, I had Mod 6 off, which was very nice, especially with all the traveling I had to do. But the only issue that I came to experience was the potential of interviewing on class day. So that was a proposition that I did not want to have to use one of my like 10 off days for that, since we're not doing much in that period anyway. So I just brought it up as soon as I realized I was running out of spots that I could safely interview and travel throughout those 6 weeks I was on Mod 6. I just reached out to UIC like really early, let them know my situation, showed them the available dates that they were giving me, and that my best option was that day, to avoid like multiple flights back and forth from like California to Chicago, back to California, when I just wanted to stay in California for that period of time. So they were very open to, like, they're very willing to help with me. I didn't have to use one of my days off for that, which I appreciated. So that was the only issue that I came across in terms of scheduling.
I don't have
Thank you, guys.
I don't have much to add on to that. Like, I mean, just like Denise was saying, is just be open with your preceptor. And if you figure out that you're getting your interviews at a specific time, just let your preceptor know ahead of time. And most preceptors, they know, you know, a lot of people are applying for residency. I mean, worst comes to worst, you could always just say, you know, like, I'll make up the days, or I'll stay extra hours, or like, can I just do some sort of project or in-service to make up for that day? But I think from my experience, majority of my preceptors were like okay with me skipping an entire day and not making it up.
Thank you, guys.
I have a question about behavioral questions and like what's the best way to tackle those. So people have said with virtual interviews, sometimes maybe the time may be cut down so that they can interview more people. And I personally hate being scripted, but would you say that maybe using like a method like the STAR method is a good way to like keep yourself on track when answering a question like that? Or what other kind of strategies have you guys used when answering those?
If I could just answer this first, just really quick, because I feel like this is something that I feel like I performed very strongly in last year and again this year so far. But you have to be scripted to a point if you would like to maximize your chances of matching at your top program. especially if a program, well, ASHP requires each program to have some type of criteria in terms of selection to make sure that it's unbiased and that it's like 100% like on the up and up. So they will, at least the programs I interviewed with, they will score applicants based on the STAR method. So if you're not using it and if you're not having a clear situation, task, actions, and results, you won't get full credit for that question, no matter how blown away they are by what you've done. So that is something, it may seem scripted, but you're more just getting ideas in each section and then filling in, like walking them through a story, and you're talking it out like now. Like, I feel like nothing I've said today has sounded scripted, but I mean, I've had talking points. It's just making sure you hit those talking points, hit those clear situation, tasks, actions, and results, and making sure that you have at least like 2 or 3 key scenarios that you can apply to different settings, so that you don't have to wait for describe a time that you made a great intervention. You don't have to wait for that one keyword to say your story. You have some type of intervention that you'll use in like 5 different behavioral style questions. So definitely try to use STAR method. Try to have like, I would say 3 scenarios that you can quickly and confidently speak to that highlights how you provide value to them as a pharmacist.
Yeah, I agree with that. I kind of did that. I basically, as I was going through my rotations, I kind of kept, I mean, they tell you to keep like a notebook or something to like jot down interventions that you made, but like the like really meaningful interventions, I think like stick with you regardless. Like I didn't have to write down any of mine. They just kind of like stuck out in my head, and just like you kind of have to have like 3 or 4 of them in your back pocket, and like you can like manipulate those situations too to fit like the question that they're asking. Like a lot of times I always like name time that you made an intervention, or name a time that you made made a recommendation that didn't, like the team didn't agree with or something. Or name a time that you like one of your recommendations like went well. Like there's like literally the same situation can kind of like apply to like different questions. So I think like keeping like 3 or 4 of them in your back pocket like is going to help you to answer any kind of those behavioral type questions and how you would approach a situation.
I guess
Really close. I was sitting across the table from somebody, and literally they had 4 boxes for each answer. And if you didn't say something that would fit in terms of one of those criteria, they wouldn't write anything in that box, and you wouldn't get credit for that question at all. And I think that's just something that's important to know.
It's very helpful to know.
Can you repeat that last point, Henry? I didn't catch that.
Yeah, just one of the places I interviewed at, just the table that we were sitting on we were on the narrow end of the table. So I was able to see his scoring system because he was still using a pen, like a paper. And each question that he asked had 4 boxes underneath, essentially correlating with that STAR method. And to like refresh their memory, they would write down stuff for each section. So if you didn't say something that fit nicely in one of those 4 sections, they wouldn't write anything in there and they wouldn't score that section. So especially if it's like on a scale of 20 per question, if you're only getting 15 out of 20, even if you answer all 10 questions beautifully, someone else just needs to answer all 4 of those and score higher than you. So especially when they're interviewing a lot of people and they need to find some way of quantitatively looking at the candidate, that's something that can quickly force you to make up ground in other aspects with your letter of intent and CV and things of that nature.
Gotcha. Thank you.
And Jake, did you have a comment too, I believe?
I think I lost my train of thought. Oh, sorry. Okay, I got it. So kind of like Denise was saying, for me, a journal really helped, especially throughout my rotation experiences. I got that recommendation like early on, so I was like actually able to start early on. So mod 1, just keeping track of like those major interventions you made or keeping track of projects you've made. And then just come in prepared for interviews, have something to talk about from work, have something to talk about from like a good rotation, have something to talk about from like volunteer experience. and then some sort of leadership activity in class. And then you could always talk about grades, but like, grades aren't always the thing that determine that you're going to get a residency or not. So it's about, all your other experiences too.
Great, and we still have 10 minutes left. We would love if anyone else in the audience has any questions they would like to ask our panelists.
I had a question for all of you. You mentioned that Mod 6 is a better one to take off because that's when a lot of interviews happen, and that Mod 5 can also be busy with the letters of recommendation, letter of intent. Do you have any examples of some of the quote unquote easier rotations to take during that time? So you have a bit more time? I don't know if you had any insight on that. Or at least the ones that are less time consuming per se. I'm not trying to like pull an easy one. I'm just trying to figure out my APPE the schedule ahead of time, or at least get a jump on that.
That's definitely a great question. And I mean, I'm pretty sure everyone heard this over and over again, get your hard rotations out of the way. I mean, that's what I kind of did, got all my hard rotations out the way, but I was kind of unlucky in a way where my Mod 6 turned out to be inpatient medicine at UIC. And that's when all my interviews fell on. So they were like extremely long days. And then I still had to work on like case presentations. So just kind of for a suggestion is maybe choosing, I mean, if you can stick to like a hospital rotation or like a retail setting, because, in retail setting, you're just going to be like there for 8 hours, go home. You won't have like much projects to work on. Same thing for like a hospital rotation, but I would definitely avoid like any internal medicine, any sort of like hard AM care experience. I would leave those for like beforehand.
I definitely also front loaded my rotation experiences. And I was somebody that when it came to preferencing, I tried to preference either mod 6, 5, or 7 off. I think I used that order. If I did not have mod 6 off, I think I preference my community rotation in that area as well as my general hospital, like operational rotation. I think those are the two rotation experiences I tried to put in that area. So other people did academia, which was another great experience, but I was also flexible in allowing you to have that time off for interviews, at least supplemented with projects outside of that period. But yeah, I wouldn't have done like my Mickey rotation on mod 6 or something like that. So I guess it's something to consider.
Yeah, definitely. I think your community or your hospital is probably going to be the good go-to to have during like mod 6. And depending on your AmCare rotation, you might have a little more time. My AmCare rotation I was in like the MTM clinic, so there were like longer days, and then like down a pharmacist, so I basically had to do like basically pick up all the, I don't want to say slack, but like pick up the extra work that they, couldn't get to because they were down a pharmacist. But yeah, community or hospital, I think is definitely, if you can get those, if you can't get mod 6 off, community or hospital is probably the best rotations to have during, mod 6 and that interview season.
Okay, awesome. Thanks so much for your advice.
Hi guys, this is Katie. I had a question regarding follow-up from after interviews. So I know in the past, like it's been suggested you either email or send a handwritten note. Obviously this year will probably be email just because everything's virtual anyway. But I guess just any suggestions or advice as far as your approach to following up after interviews, when you did it, and then I'm assuming all of our emails will be on the website, but I don't know if that's a bad assumption to make.
So I utilize, Google has a feature where you can like schedule emails to send, which is amazing. So like before an interview, I actually like typed out everything. Cause I feel like I'm also one of those people who are like, I don't want to seem like too eager and like send the email like right after the interview. So I would like schedule it to send like the next day. Cause you always want to put like, you don't want some like generic ass email. You want to have like something like you want to talk about how you yeah, I swear to what. you want to talk about, you want to make sure you mention in the email like something that you talked about, and you want to make sure it's not just like, you know, like I said, a generic email. So you always want to make sure you mention something that you talked about. So, but yeah, I think definitely sending emails. I don't think I've never sent any like handwritten notes. I think that they would emails faster. It's going to get to them sooner, and they're probably going to, look at an email more than they would look at a handwritten letter. I don't know. But like I said, definitely a must is like saying thank you and like thank you for the opportunity, thank you for the consideration, and then you guys then talk about something that you mention something that you guys talked about in the interview, and then also like talk about how after the interview, how your interest has only increased, in the program, stuff like that. Yeah, you probably don't have to send, like I said, don't send the email like you go home after the interview and like send the email, like it's like a next day thing. But like I said, I was on like rotation, so like I would usually like I didn't want to like forget about it, so I would just like write the email after the interview and then just like schedule it to send on Google. But yeah.
Good takeaways. I did send handwritten cards while I was on site, or like before I left that city that I was in, just because it was quicker to get there. And like Denise said, I tried to add some type of personal touch that we discussed during the interview, just to make sure it wasn't just the standard thing, which kind of factored into the time that it took to get to the place. But I also did follow up with an email, like an actual email, which, like we were talking about, may be more practical now that everything is virtual in general. But lost my train of thought. All right, so in terms of asking questions, or like not asking questions, submitting an email. I mean, I liked doing it, especially because some of the people responded to me, and I think that we had good discussions after the fact. So I would continue to do that, but it was kind of sketchy sending a card and not knowing if they received it in time or knowing how to approach that.
I won't really repeat of pretty much what they were talking about. I mean, I just wanted to say that I definitely did send emails after every interview. And just like Denise was saying, don't be that eager person to send an email as soon as you step out on the parking lot, like right away. I would say just, wait a day, type out I would say more personable email. Don't do like the standard template of, oh, thank you for this and this. I would say thank them and bring up a topic you spoke about to that person. And then you can kind of like summarize your strengths or like your interest in the program and just make it brief. Don't give them like a paragraph or two. I would say just a sentence or two, thank you, and call it a day.
Great, thank you guys. So our last question is in the chat. It's from Eileen, and she asked just a general question. How important is research in getting into a residency? Would you put it on the same scale as grades, work, and or extracurriculars? And yeah, we can go with backwards order, Jake, Henry, Denise.
Okay. I guess I could speak first since I won't have much to talk about. I had no research experience going into residency, and I plan on not having any more after I'm done with residency. I don't know. I'm just not a big research person. But I mean, I would say research is definitely important, especially if you're applying for like a inpatient, pharmacy residency. I mean, even community-based residencies, like we do have to do research projects, and then they do, incorporate like clinical data. You could do surveys-based research, but I wouldn't place it on like the top of the list. They look at a variety of factors. They're going to definitely look at your work experience, how do you balance your grades, time management, extracurriculars, volunteer activities, but research would definitely be in there too. So I'm pretty sure the other two can answer a little bit more on that.
Yeah, so I did have a decent variety of research experiences that I could speak to during interviews. And I think it did play a role. It's obviously everything plays a role in terms of what you've done during pharmacy school. But anecdotally, that's something that came up honestly on every interview. especially because part of one of my jobs was with clinical research. So I was able to speak to that on top of just having a research project that I was associated with. I was helping put together like large clinical trials. And I think that was a good talking point that actually came up yesterday as well, because it was in the transplant space, and one of the heart transplant pharmacists knew one of my managers, since obviously pharmacy is a small world, and she was able to we had a nice conversation about my experience there. So I think like anything else, if someone else has that connection, it's a good way to bridge that gap to help you stand out a little bit more. Or like, that's the person that I talked to that worked under one of my colleagues. Like, even if research or no research, I think it's just helping you bridge those gaps and show that you are committed to pharmacy, whether or not you do research or if it's a job. Maybe it was Walgreens that I talked about in every interview. Like, it didn't matter that it was research, but just another opportunity for me to have something to connect to somebody else about.
Yeah, I also did research like through the university, and then like my second job, I also worked at the med school in like the Department of Medical Education, which I like helped with research there. So I mean, I don't know. I don't want to say it's like, it obviously does have like a role. It's just another thing that you can talk about, another thing that helps you stand out. I don't think not having it is a huge like downside. I mean, obviously, like you still have to be involved. I think like it all kind of plays together. Like how involved you are, your grades, your work experience. If you worked 2 jobs and you were involved in, you had e-board positions in 3 different orgs, and you volunteered, like you probably don't have the time to do research. So, but all those other things help you stand out, outside of that. So I definitely think research is an easier, if you can get involved in research, it's an easy way to help you stand out. But I don't think not having research experience is going to keep you from getting a residency, as long as you have all those other things that help you be a strong candidate.
Great, thank you all so much. So I do realize it's 6:02 now. We'll wrap it up. Would our speakers mind if we share your emails with the attendees here, just if they have any further questions? Jake, I do want to direct you to the chat if you haven't seen that message already from Noah. But otherwise, I think that's it. So thank you all so much for attending. Like we said, their emails are in the chat if you have any further questions.
And then in response to Noah's, I know the chats keep moving up, so I was trying to kind of briefly read through it. Just go ahead and email me, please. I included my email. Oh, whoops. .edu. Thanks, Henry. .edu. There we go.
I definitely will. Thank you.
Yeah, just go ahead and shoot me an email, please.
The UNC website as well. My email's on there, and it's a direct link to email all the residents through that way.
Great. Thank you all so much again for coming to speak to us this evening. I hope you all have a great rest of your night and stay safe.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys. Nice seeing everyone.
Yeah, have a great evening.
Thank you, guys.